Hello, Garland Nixon here. Let's have a sober discussion about Europe. However, if you're actually in Europe, you might want to get a drink. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and you will forgive me if you are actually on Rockfin because I had a little technical difficulty I had to fix while the music was playing. So you'll start a second late. But at any rate, let's talk. I'm going to talk about Europe. Last night I did a video and I went into a mad, and kind of crazy rant where I screamed and yelled and jumped up and down about Europe because it frustrates me to see human beings set on a path to economic and physical disaster. And I love people and an entire society with a beautiful culture and people, things of that nature. To see that on the way down is, let's just say, alarming for me. So I went berserk, but I did what I had to do. Sometimes people need to hear things in different ways. So what I want to talk about is a reality of what we can expect in Europe. What I think could be 100% wrong, but I'm going to give you a scenario of what I think happening in Europe and why, and take it for what it's worth. So I often use an analogy. I use a lot of analogies, but here's one that I've used many times. I like sci-fi movies. If you know me, I like sci-fi movies. I like really stupid comedies, silly comedies, and like some old school horror movies. The vampires and werewolves. An American Werewolf in London. There's a movie to watch, right? So at any rate, while you're listening to Warren Zevon, Werewolves of London, right? So there was a movie, I forgot what it was named, but it was one of these space movies. And somewhere in this movie, there was a spaceship, the bad guy, right? It was like this Death Star kind of giant spaceship, very, very powerful. They were going to take out the good guys. And things didn't work out well for them. And at some point, the bad guys were on the ship, and the helmsman, right, looked at the captain and says to the captain, we don't, they were near a planet, and he said, Captain, he said, the helm is not responding. We're out of power and we're caught in the planet's gravity. What do we do? And the captain looked at him, and he had a little monocle thing, and he put that down, or like came out to the side. He looked at him and he said, we die. It was philosophically brilliant, right? It was so simplistic. Why ask such a stupid question? Isn't the answer obvious, right? And the analogy that I've often used is, there are things you can do on the edge of a cliff. You're walking towards the cliff, and you're like, and somebody says, don't get too close to the edge because you could fall. You idiot, don't tell me what to do. I know what to do. You see, I've got a great plan. I'm going to go near the edge of the cliff. I'm going to get these pictures. And you tell them about your brilliant plan. And I've got a rope tied off. That's around this tree, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, yeah, but it's kind of dangerous. The rope could break. The tree could fall. It's an old rope. It's a rotten tree. And they tell you all these reasons why you shouldn't walk near the edge of that cliff. And you don't listen. You tell them about how brilliant you are, how many times you've walked near the edge of cliffs, you've taken pictures over cliffs, and this guy's an idiot. What does he know? How dare this person tell you not to walk near the edge of the cliff when you've been taking tremendous panoramic photographs on the edge of the cliff for years, and you know what you're doing, and you have a plan, and a good plan, and it always works. And this time, right when you get to the edge of the cliff, the rope breaks, you're in the air. There is an inevitable outcome to that, isn't there? Once you are in the air, there ain't a whole lot of room for plans. You can be in the air and you can think to yourself, what do I do now? I don't have a parachute. The rope is broken. I'm in the air, 1,500 feet down. Let's see what's below me. And you look, and there's scraggly rocks and trees and things of that nature. And the human body is flying in the air at roughly 32 feet per second. You may be able to calculate, due to some, wind and how much your body, the volume of your body is blocking air, could slow you up just a smidgen, but roughly 32 feet per second. That's what you're moving at. And down below are the rocks. There ain't a whole lot to negotiate with that, is there? Bottom line is, you can have a philosophical discussion in your mind, but it's going to be a very brief discussion, because in the end, there's rocks below. Inevitability awaits. If you've watched the Matrix, right? It is inevitable, Mr. Anderson. So, why do I bring that up? Because in life, there are many circumstances where we face that. As I've said, I've raised a child, and one of the things that I think parents should say to their children is, look, child, when you make decisions, think to yourself, what's the worst possible outcome? And ask yourself, I remember saying, look, you're going to high school now. When I was in high school, you know what I did if I wanted to? I had an honest discussion. I went to high school. I did whatever I wanted to do. And I came home. And I lied to my parents if it was something I didn't want them to know. Right? And there's nothing they could do, because that's what a kid can do. I told my child that. And I said, now you can do that, but here's what you need to think about. Whatever decision you make, what's the worst possible outcome? And are you willing to live with the results of the worst possible outcome? You're taking pictures on the cliff. What's the worst possible outcome? If the rope breaks, if the tree limb breaks, whatever, certain death. You'll have 20 or 30 seconds in the air, but in the end, we know how this one ends, right? We know how this story ends, right? That's a long-winded way of getting to Europe. What happened in Europe? We just go a little ways back. If we go, how did we get here? Very briefly. Over the last several years, over the last several decades, Europe is, we could go way back for hundreds of years and colonialism and all that, but let's take the short road. Over the last several years, the European governments, in alliance with, or shall we say, in subservience to, the U.S. empire in Washington, D.C., went around the world and attacked some other countries and stole their shit. You could go back to 1952 and going to Iran and overthrowing Iran with the UK and the US government and stealing their oil and splitting it up. And now today they're like, Iran's the bad guy. Really? Well, you went to their country, overthrew their government, and stole their oil, and somehow they're the bad guys today? But you can convince your people of that. I think the thing about the US empire and its vassal colonies in the EU was the only thing they really cared about was that they could convince their people of that, because they used raw power and force. As you've probably heard me say, power is only power until you use it. Then it becomes force. So they would take raw power, convert it to force, and do whatever they wanted to. So they'd go around the world, they'd steal somebody's stuff, they'd blow their country to smithereens, they'd steal all their resources, and they'd come home, they'd propagandize their people, and the people in Europe would say, we're the good guys. And that worked for a while. Worked to some extent is an operative term, because who did it work for? They didn't share the money with the people in Europe and the US and throughout the empire. To a great extent, you lived better than other countries, living off their resources, but you could convince yourself that you were the good guys because you were propagandized into believing that. Just like here, we're propagandized into believing that we're the good guys, so we could convince ourselves of that. And then we could overlook the reality of what our government was doing around the world. And then we could just say to ourselves, look, these other countries full of people, they're economically, intellectually, morally, culturally, spiritually inferior to us. Therefore, it's okay what we're doing. We're actually looking out for them. We're helping them. Whatever we needed to tell ourselves, we tell ourselves. But the chickens were starting to come home to roost over the past few decades, really starting to come home to roost. Woke up one day, what the hell? A million Syrians on the doorstep. How'd that happen? The U.S. government and its allies and vassals decided they were going to launch a dirty war on Syria, overthrow the Syrian government and steal their stuff and destabilize Syria, and the same as they were doing with Iran and Iraq and on and on and on, right? And people here just, rather than face the reality of what their government was doing in their name, they got mad at the Syrian refugees. How dare you come up to our doorstep without acknowledging? They didn't just wake up one day and say, it's Thursday. I think I'll hop on a boat and risk my life and go to the Europe. Nah, that ain't what happened. It's a lot more complicated than that. And it has to do with a dirty war being launched on their country by the CIA, and subsequently a propaganda war being launched against the American empire, the people within the empire, to ensure that they stayed complacent, to ensure that they kept their mouths shut and that they felt good about themselves. Because you couldn't just be quiet. You had to actually feel justified in the things that your government was doing in your name that wasn't in your best interest. So then they get the real bright idea. We're going to overthrow the government of Libya. They got lots of oil. Why wouldn't you? You can steal the oil. And at the time, Muammar Gaddafi had said, I'm going to start an African currency. Libya was the wealthiest country in Africa. We're going to start it because they're loaded with oil, right? For a number of reasons, not just that. Remember, Nigeria is loaded with oil, but only 1% of the people in Nigeria get any benefit off of that. The rest of that money goes to Royal Dutch Shell. The rest of it goes to Exxon Mobil, on and on and on. So Nigeria is a state that is being country that is being robbed by the U.S. empire. Libya wasn't buying that. Gaddafi said no. So he had to die. So they killed Muammar Gaddafi, made an example out of him, laughed about it, overthrew the government of Libya. But something interesting happened. Libya was kind of a gateway country, right? Libya was a country that blocked a lot of African countries that have been destabilized for centuries due to colonialism, right? Impoverished for centuries due to colonialism. Now, what we're told in the empire is they're poor because they're intellectually and morally and spiritually and all of those things culturally inferior to us. Their society's behind. That's why. But if you look at the history of colonialism, they were being robbed blind. So Libya gets knocked over, and all of these people in these areas that have been driven into poverty, held in poverty for a couple centuries, say, we're out. We are out, dude. We're out, right? And out means right through Libya, which is the gateway, and right on into Europe. And might I add, as of course they're blowing up Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, destroying those, and all those people are like, dude, we're out. We're heading for Europe where there's a better life. Oh, and here's the thing about it. If you think about it, all they did, nobody ever really says this, is they followed their resources into Europe. You're in the Middle East. And all this oil, you're in a country and Libya, and most people don't know this, the US and the UK and the US empire is looting and stealing Syrian oil right now. Look it up. They're doing the same thing to Libya. They followed their looted resources right home to Europe. Your leaders went, they grabbed these resources, they brought them home, and the people who they were stolen from followed them here. They get to Europe. And now the Europeans and I can't blame the Europeans because, people screamed, oh, you're a bunch of evil racists, because I'm sure there's some of that then. There's no question there's a certain level of that there. But there was also a reality, and that is you've got a group of working people and they're all in their community and they have their culture and things like that. And they get flooded by people from another area with another culture who are looking for jobs and drive down the price of labor, and so now they don't make as much. So the reality is, when the Europeans push back on this influx of migrants, with some reasons valid, maybe some not, but a lot of very, very valid economic and cultural reasons, said, hey, what's going on? Instead of their governments acknowledging that, they said, you're a bunch of racist scum. How dare you? And they demonize those who made a legitimate economic and cultural argument. And people don't want to admit that there was some legitimacy to their economic and cultural arguments. And people only want to acknowledge that there was some racism there. There was some there, but there was in fact legitimacy to the cultural and racial arguments and opposition to a massive influx of migrants from any damn where, right? So they, in saying that, they discounted and disregarded their people and just attacked them. Hey, you idiots are a bunch of racists. Why, if you weren't such racist, you'd say, bring in all this cheap labor and help to drive down your own and help to drive down your own a job market. And let's be honest, if you bring in a bunch of poor people, these were impoverished people. And as I said, this was the chickens coming home to roost. They were impoverished by years of colonialism and things of that nature, and by the destabilization of the U.S. empire attacking their country. They get there. I mean, if you pick up one side of the stick, you got to pick up the other side. One side of the stick says Europeans had some valid cultural and economic complaints about a sudden influx of cheap labor and people with a different and unique cultures. But on the other side, you got to pick up the other side of the stick, which says that these people coming here were victims of colonialism, of neoconservative and neoliberal attacks, economic and military collapses on their country. And they came there and they're like, you stole all our stuff and brought it here. We want some of it. Right. So this was the people that avoided. Here's what's funny. The people that avoided the blame were the people that did all this shit. Those were the people that weren't blamed. The people who were economically screwed that lived here, they're a bunch of racists. The people that are coming here, they're attacked as, wandering in and that we don't want you here and you're doing bad things. But the bankrupt, the intellectually and morally bankrupt elite ruling class are the ones who escape judgment. And they're just sitting there smiling all the way to the bank like they always do, right? So let's continue. And I'm just having a chat here. So it's in the morning and I'm just having some fun, just riffing and just a stream of consciousness. Take it for what it's worth. Okay, let's get to where we are now. So at some point, the U.S. empire wakes up. And what do you have? You have three economic systems, I think, that are in some level intermingled, in some level in competition, right? You've got socialism, which we could talk about what that is and how it really works. You've got industrial capitalism, right? And I'll say industrial / economic capitalism. Then you've got financialized capitalism, right? But what is going on in the world is this. Financial capitalism is pure. That's the United States. And it's an ugly system. And it's an expansive system, expansionist system. Financialized capitalism means you make money off of complex financial tools, printing money, QE, right? Quantitative easing. In other words, printing money. Another way of saying printing money, a technical way of saying printing money, right? And you come up with complicated financial tools that nobody really understands. If you really get to it, if you think you understand asset-backed securities, most people don't. They're understandable, but most people don't really understand them. They just know that it's magic. If you talk about derivatives and credit default swaps, right? It's not hard to understand, but again, it's magic. It's economic magic. You don't produce anything in the real world. You create a magical kingdom of money, and within that magical kingdom of money, you come up with ways to extract money from magical money, mostly from the working class, the working poor, and the poor, and ensure that all of that money goes into the hands of a few oligarchs. That's a financialized system. Does not work in the best interest whatsoever of the masses. It is a very, very bad system for 99% of the people. But that's one of the systems. Let's talk about the other system when I say socialism, when I say industrial capitalism, and I could say commodity capitalism. Let's talk about those three things. Since I'm chatting, I think it's important to build a foundation here. Okay, and if you've heard this before, hey, disregard it. If you haven't, it's worth listening to. Having traveled extensively in South America, I know I heard the socialism. What is socialism? What is it they want in South America? Most people have no understanding of that, and I'll briefly explain it. What do they want in South America? Right? Venezuela, as a matter of fact, Bolivia, as a matter of fact, right? They have natural resources. They got a lot of natural resources. Let's take Bolivia, Bolivia, lots of lithium needed for electric stuff, batteries, things of that nature. Venezuela, lots of oil. What do the people of Venezuela want? They want democracy. I've been to, they say we'll fight for our democracy. What do they mean? They want to vote for their leaders. So they want bottom up. They want the people to choose the leaders, simple voting, democracy, freedom, rights. They want all that stuff. But what they want the government to do is nationalize the natural resources, the oil, the lithium, or whatever, with government companies. They want the government to then sell those natural resources, to take the money from the natural resources, to use it to fund the country. They don't get taxed, either very low taxes or no taxes. The government is then flush with money. The government can give you free electricity, can give free houses to the poor. They can have a very robust security net, economic security net for the people. They can wipe out poverty. That's what they want. People scream, they call it socialism. It doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter what terms you use. That's what they want. Pretty much same kind of thing with China, but it's kind of an industrial socialism in that the Chinese, they have some natural resources, right? But they don't rise to the level of a Venezuela or some of the other countries who do things with theirs. That's not their priority. What they do is something similar, right? They take industry, and the government owns the industry. The government then takes that money. The government does a lot of central planning of the economy, and they take that money from the industry, and they use that to fund the government, to fund all of their projects. Now, my understanding of China, as well as I understand it, is the people don't get the same type of democratic vote that they do in, say, a Venezuela. But ultimately, here's something I have to say. When we talk about democracy and people scream about this country does or doesn't have democracy, right? What is the standard you use to judge democracy? Because one could make this argument. Democracy is basically this: does the government respond to the needs of the people? I don't care what you call it. I don't care how it works. Does it? If it's a monarchy, but does it respond to the needs of the people? Do you have a government where all the people say, we're happy, if we get a pothole, our government fills it? Can we go to college? Can we do the things that we want? And those particular people are happy, right? It's not for somebody else to come to your country and say, you deserve some other amorphous thing called freedom that we are calling it, but you're happy with your country, but you can't have that. So there's an industrial socialism, I would argue, with a blend of capitalism in China. They call it, what do they call it? Like socialism with the Chinese. I'll use the word tinge, whatever they mean, right? So that's their thing. But I would call it democracy for this reason, because ultimately how I judge democracy is whether or not it responds to the people. And how do you know that? Ask the people. And if you look at all of your polling in America, a country that's hostile to China, it's very clear that somewhere between 86 and 93% of the people, I've heard as high as 95, in China approve of the government, right? Well, it's none of my business then. It's theirs, whatever they get. People complain about China. That's how China works. So you've got an industrial kind of socialism going on there, / capitalism. We can use, those are words we're using to describe it. It doesn't matter what words we use to describe it. There you go, right? So keep over here. You got a financialized, in the West, a financialized economic system that is built on magical money, and that clearly is not responding to the needs. We're going to get into that of the people. Okay, Russia. And why is it that Russia aligns so well with and is so friendly with South America, with China? Because what do? They have nationalized the commodities. They have a tremendous amount of commodities. It's a huge country. They got natural resources. You name it: timber, gold, you name it. Gas, oil. It's a huge country. So they did that, right? And if I'm not mistaken, I think they got like a flat tax of 15%, I've heard, whatever the case may be, because the government is funded by these commodities. that they've nationalized, Gazprom, Rosneft, whatever the hell, they're able not to tax their people heavily. And they're, when you get outside of the big cities, there's still a lot of poverty in Russia, but it's building, it's expanding. It's come a long way in a short amount of time. Okay. Is it the perfect democracy? No. But does it respond to the needs of the people? That if you judge democracy by how it responds to the needs of the people, there seems to be a level of democracy there, considering that if it's only been like 30 years, they've come pretty far in 30 years, going from non-democracy to democracy in 30 years. I would say they've come further in 30 years than the US has gone in 250 years, because we're going in the opposite direction. Okay, let's keep going. So what you have now is a clash of those systems, because the financialized system is fragile. The financialized system doesn't work in the best interest of the masses. So the financialized system can't afford for their masses to look at other potential systems, hybrid systems, evaluate them, because they may say that might work a little better than ours. And I want some of that. I want a hybrid system too. I want some of our oil money or some of our natural resources money to fund the government, so that we don't have as high a taxes or something like that. Our infrastructure is a little better. They may ask that, they may not. But if they look at other options, the possibility is they may like some of them, or they want a little piece of that, right? Especially when the system they have is not working in their best interest, and that's becoming clear. Let's go to Europe. All that foundation, let's go to Europe. Europe is in pure and absolute collapse. No way to put it in another way, in another manner. Absolute, total spiraling collapse, implosion, destruction, you name it, right? Why is that? Because because the people in Europe thought they had independence and sovereignty, but all they had was the illusion of independence and sovereignty. The same thing the American people have, the illusion of democracy. They maintain the illusion. And now that the people in charge are now challenged by China, they're not challenged by the Chinese people. They're challenged by the potential that another system may have better economic success, may have better internal success than the US. Russia and China are on the rise. India is on the rise. They use other systems. India has a capitalism / hybrid system, right? But it's on the rise. It's not pure neoliberalism. And as India works with China and Russia, it's starting to hybrid a little bit. It could go in a bad direction as far as the US is concerned, but it could be independent. So the US now says, financialized capitalism now says, we must strike out and we must stop any possibility of other systems that could be successful. And we'll do that by starting with weakening Russia and weakening China. We got to weaken these countries. How are we going to do that? They're getting stronger, very strong, and their system is working better than ours, because ours is working only on behalf of a tiny group of oligarchs. So they go to Russia's border, they go to China's border. We'll go to Taiwan, we'll go to Ukraine, and we'll do the exact same thing. We'll create mischief on their border. We'll hopefully suck them into a war. Then we'll go to our vassals in Europe. That's where I'm getting to. And we'll say to them, okay, you got to stop buying stuff from them. You got to stop doing business with them. And they get two benefits. Number one, three benefits, but let's get into them. Number one, you weaken Russia and China because you kill one of their big markets. Number two, you strengthen us because you completely take that big market, and now we have it, and we can sell stuff to them at an exorbitant price. And we've already determined that they're puppies. We've already determined that they're complete and total vassals. So not only can we extract wealth from Europe, we can do it right in front of their face. We can do it clearly and obviously, and they're too weak to even push back. We can just rape them right in front of, we can say to them, we're going to rape you economically. Then we can rape them economically, and they'll just lay there and be raped. So how easy is that? Let's do that. I mean, if you've got a victim, a willing victim that says, come rape me. I mean, I hate to use that analogy, but it is a very appropriate analogy for what the United States government is doing to Europe, as horrible as that may sound. And Europe is a willing participant, right? Not the European people. Well, yes, the European people, but in a not indirect kind of way. And here's what I mean. In order for the US to treat Europe, to de-industrialize, right, Europe, and to set Europe, to turn Europe into a smoking pile of ash economically. In order for them to do that, they need the European people to be complicit, or at the very least, to be accepting of this. So what they do is they launch a propaganda war. Look, at the beginning of this Ukraine, the US was like, we got an information war. Who do you think that information war is against? It wasn't against the Russians. They know what time it is. They know what they're doing. It wasn't against the Chinese because they're supporting the Russians. It wasn't against the global South because they all support the Russians and the Chinese because they're trying to eat and they're doing well. They're improving because of their associations with Russia and China. So who was it against? In order to completely wipe out Europe and to completely economically devastate and subjugate Europe, they had to launch an information war against the Europeans. It's hard to beat the shit out of somebody and have the person sit there and say, thanks for kicking my ass. You have to really brainwash these people. So there's blue and yellow flags everywhere. The trains are blue and yellow. Man, you talk about a mind job they're doing on these people. So now you've got the Europeans who are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They've been propagandized to believe that they got to stand up against Putin. And here's the other thing. They took advantage of a dynamic that already existed. They've been teaching the Europeans, and the Europeans have been obediently accepting a paradigm in which the Russians are evil, whatever that means. I don't even know what it means. But the Russians, in a country of 150 million people, are somehow evil. Evil as a group in the aggregate, evil individually, evil as a society, just evil. Just take the word evil and paste it towards anything Russia. So they've been brainwashing these people to believe that, as absurd as it may be. So once you got them there, now you can say anything we do to stop this evil is a necessary good because we're doing it and they're evil. Anything we do is good. And you have to trust our leaders because our leaders are standing up for evil on your behalf, standing up to evil on your behalf. So now you've got the people of Europe running around waving a bunch of flags to a point where they're literally supporting Nazis. And what is the US? And its information war is so good that it convinces Europeans that Nazis are now the good guys. We got to support Nazis. And yes, they're Nazis, but just kind of brush that aside. You know, when you get to the point that says, sure, there's Nazis in Ukraine, but you've been brainwashed. Because remember, when somebody says but, what does the word but mean? It means ignore everything I said before this word. So you say, sure, yeah, okay, there may be Nazis in Ukraine, but Russia has Nazis too. And but. What that means is this. Let's unpack that. Sure, there's Nazis in Ukraine, but in other words, I'm willing to accept that. You know, sure, the girl says, sure, my boyfriend's got 10 other girlfriends, but he really treats me well. I'm right. A guy, yeah, sure, my girlfriend's a crack hooker, but what is he saying? I'm willing to accept that my girlfriend's a crack hooker. The girl says, I'm willing to accept that my boyfriend's got 10 other girlfriends. But simply means I'm going to ignore all of that. So they've gotten Europe to a point where it's sure there's a bunch of guys in Ukraine. And yeah, granted, they got swastika tattoos all over them. They're running around screaming Sieg Heil. They're doing the old Nazi salute. You know, they're goose stepping all over the place. But in other words, ignore everything I said before the word but. I'm willing to accept that because I've been brainwashed to that point. So they've got the Europeans where they need them. They've got them at a sure there's Nazis in Ukraine, but mentality, game, set, and match. Once you get there, where do you go from there? Once somebody gets you to the point where you can say, sure, there's Nazis, but, or when somebody says, are there Nazis? And instead of saying yes or no, that's Russian propaganda. In other words, and because the answer would be, it may be, but there's still Nazis in Ukraine and you're supporting them and your dollars and your money is going to them, right? So now you've got the Europeans where you want. They're willing to accept something that is to their detriment and that is morally and ethically reprehensible. They're willing to go along with something that's moral and ethically reprehensible. Man, when you get to that point, your downfall is certain. So now what happens? Now where does this go? I think it's clear. And that is the United States is separating. Look, the European economy, the European industry, the US is deindustrialized itself. It has a little industry, but it wants to reindustrialize. Remember, Biden and Trump have been saying, we're going to bring jobs home, we're going to bring industry back, right? Think about this. And everybody thought, yay, they're bringing industry back from China. They didn't say where they were bringing it back from, did they? They didn't say we're bringing it back from China. They said we're bringing it back. And even people like me said, get out of here. There's no way. It's too expensive. Labor's too expensive. Labor costs, blah, blah, blah. There's no way in hell that they can bring labor back from China to the US because China's too effective and efficient with industry. We missed something. They weren't talking about China. They were talking about bringing jobs home, but they didn't say India. They didn't say China. They said bringing jobs back to America. Bad news, Europe. We're now finding out exactly what they meant when they said bringing jobs home to America. They meant Europe. America looked at China and it said, holy crap. We have no choice to compete with China, to compete with Russia. We've only got one choice: to reindustrialize to some extent, or we're going to be in collapse. How do we do that? We can't bring home jobs from China. We can't bring commodities from Russia. We can't bring home jobs from India because the cost of living is too high. They can't afford labor. We can't bring our sweatshops back from Haiti and all of these other places that we have in South America and things because they're sweatshops. The reason a sweatshop works is what? The low cost of labor. It's practically slave labor, right? So we can overthrow those governments, and the people don't want to accept slave labor, but because we have to control the government, the people have no say. Boom. So the sweatshops are done. Can't do that. China, Russia, India, sorry, no luck. We can't bring that. There's only one place left for those jobs to come from, brother: Europe. So now what happens? The US says, we'll deindustrialize Europe. We'll bring them home. How do you do that? That's easy. You understand that Europe's industrial model is set and based off of inexpensive energy, and and you already all know this, that inexpensive energy comes from Russia. The only way you can get that industry out of there is to kill the foundation, right? You got to cut off that energy, otherwise you can't deindustrialize. You can't get those jobs home. You got to make it cheaper. It's very expensive here, but you got to make it cheaper to have for industry to work here than it is in Europe. There's only one way to do that: cut off their energy. So boom, you go in there, you go to the leaders and you say, we've got to stop Russia because they're evil, blah, 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 blah. And their vassals don't give a shit. They're an elite ruling class. They're happy as long as they're eating pan-seared trout and prawns and grilled asparagus and drinking the finest wine. So these corrupt, intellectually and morally, ethically bankrupt elites in Europe have always known the truth. These people have always known that Europe was nothing but a colony of the US, that it was occupied by US bases, not to defend Europe, but to control Europe. And that their job was one thing and one thing only: to maintain an illusion to their people that there was independence and sovereignty as they shepherded them in whatever direction the US government told them to take them. And as you've probably heard me say many times, the sheep spends his entire life fearing the wolf, only ultimately to be slaughtered and eaten by the shepherd. So they knew their job. Hey, keep the sheep, not knowing that they're sheep. Make them think that they're lions, but they're sheep. So when the US said to the shepherds, time to slaughter the sheep, they're shepherds. That's what sheep are for. You didn't raise those sheep to be your friend, to bring them home, to sit them on the couch, to hug them. You raised them eventually. First of all, you exploit them, right? Hey, you guys, that's some nice wool you got on your backs. You cut the wool off and you make something out of it. You sell the wool, whatever, and you leave those poor sons of bitches shivering in the cold. They're sheep. That's what they're supposed to do. They huddle together and they shiver. Then, after you've exploited them enough, you grab them by the friggin' ears, grab both of them by the ears, you pull them up like that, and you slice their little throats. And you hang them upside down by their rear feet until they bleed out. Then you commence to rub some nice herbs on them. You put them on a spigot and you cook them and eat them because that's a sheep's job. That's what he was. That's what he. That's the reason that you got sheep. You have a herd of sheep. You don't have. If you got a cat at home, that's a pet. You're going to feed the cat well. You got a dog, maybe a guinea pig. You're going to feed the guinea pig well. You're going to hold the guinea pig. You're going to hug it. It has a different purpose. It's kind of keeps you grounded. You come home, your pet, hey there, Fluffy, and Fluffy runs over and hugs you, and you hug Fluffy because you love Fluffy. That ain't what you do with sheep. You don't hug sheep. They're kind of fluffy, but you're going to cut the fluff off of them to make a sweater. And then ultimately, you know what? You know what? Don't let your sheep hear it. You know what's going to happen. Now, within that herd, there's some sheep that start getting wise, and they come over to the other sheep and they say, "Hey guys, yeah, hey, I mean, you know, color me skeptical here, but some of us keep disappearing and never come back. And at night, I see a bloody spot in the barn. I'm thinking these guys may be doing something bad to us. Perhaps we should try to run away." And the rest of the sheep all grab that guy. They kick him. They beat him. Oh, you crazy conspiracy theorist. Do you believe this guy? No. Don't you know the shepherd is looking out for our best interests? And so those of us who say to the other sheep, hey, perhaps we need to look into this a little bit closer, but I got a funny feeling shepherd's up to no good. We're crazy conspiracy theorists. The shepherd comes back, and those people go to the shepherd and tell him, hey, shepherd, yeah, come here. I got to talk to you. Shepherd's like, what'll it be, sheep? Old Garland over there's got a YouTube channel, and he's kind of implying that you're up to no good. Oh, Garland is he? All right, well, talk to Garland. We'll have a discussion with him. Next thing you know, there's a bloody spot in the barn. The next morning, you can't find Garland. And you look, and the shepherd's coming over, and he's all dressed up. You're like, what's happening? He's like, oh, we're having a delicious dinner tonight. We're having a special, very special meal. And they're like, oh, okay. And they never see Garland again because he tried to tell them what time it was. And now they decided that Garland would make an early exit from the flock. And the sheep just go back to grazing and do what they do. And one by one, they disappear. But eventually, the shepherd's going to, maybe times get hard. The shepherd needs a new barn. And he decides this whole flock's got to go. He calls the slaughterhouse. He herds them. Hey, guys, do you mind climbing on this truck? I'm taking you to a great place. And all sheep are go like, hey, you've always been looking out for us and protecting us from the wolves. Why should we suspect you're up to no good? Into the truck they go. On the side of the truck, it's written, Joe's Slaughterhouse, lamb and mutton at a low price. Buy yours today. Off they go, and we know how that story ends. That's the story of Europe. They're in the truck headed for the slaughterhouse. They're done, game, set, and match. Look, a friend of mine just got back from Haiti, and he's telling me, he's like, look, and he said this, and I thought about Europe. He said, when I was in Haiti, he says, it's like unbelievable. He says, you go up on the hill. He's like, and people talk about the impoverization about how poor Haiti. He said, you go up on the hill, and there's mansions with helipads and pools and servants, unbelievable oligarchs up there. He's like, and then you come down a little bit and people are starting to get kind of poor. They don't have as much. There's a tiny little middle class, very small strip. But the further you get down the hill towards the port, it gets poorer and poorer and more impoverished. And when you get all the way down by the port, it's some of the most impoverished, destitute people on the face of this earth. Raw sewage is running through canals. People have ragged clothes on. There's sweatshops there where people are making things to go to the US and Europe. He said, he looked at it and he said, and you know what I thought? I said, what? He said, that's what they got in store for us. And I'm like, uh-oh, I think I just had an epiphany. Maybe I better do a video on this one, right? And when you look at Europe, man, look, let's start with the UK. What's going down in the UK? They got Rishi Sunak now, and he's saying we've got to raise taxes on you. We've got to, and all of these things that the ruling elite, they got a billionaire guy. He's almost a billionaire in charge. That should be a hint. But They got all these things they want to do. Well, we're going to raise tax. We're going to do this. We're going to do. And then, of course, it's Liz Truss's fault. He comes in. Oh, it's all the previous people before me have done terrible things. Everything but what's obvious. They're being fleeced and slaughtered by the U.S. empire. The U.S. empire has cut off their energy source, which means that they're facing an imminent destruction. So he has to pretend that it's everything else, but it's something else. I'll deal with taxes. I'll deal with this. I'll deal with that. Now, meanwhile, the poor bastards in Europe, what are they doing? In the UK, what are they doing? Here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to rearrange the decks on the Titanic. There's a hole below the waterline, guys. The deck chairs ain't saving you. So they're like, we're going to do a national strike. What do you want with that national strike? Well, we want higher wages. Okay, all right. Let's say they double your wages. That's more money into the economy. That's going to cause more inflation. And guess what? You still don't have energy at a reasonable price. The only thing that's going to happen is the price of energy is going to keep going up. So you'll have more money to spend and less things to buy, and you won't be able to afford it, and the price of everything will go up. You haven't dealt with the problem. You have a brain tumor, and what do you think we should do? We're protesting for more aspirin because this headache's killing me. You got a brain tumor. You're going to have to deal with the tumor, and you ain't dealing with that. You're taking aspirin. So they're going to take to the streets. And of course, when they take to the streets, that's going to break things down even worse. It's going to screw up the supply chain, and it will get even worse. Why? Because they've been so propagandized that they don't understand the foundation of their problem. And it ain't what you think. You think that I'm going to say the foundation of their problem is that their economic model has been cut off. No, the foundation of their problem is that they don't have sovereignty and independence. Therefore, they're at the mercy of a gigantic propaganda machine that's telling them to do everything except address the problem. I don't care how much they get to the street, unless they go to the street and they say, we want a government that works for us, not for the United States government. You're wasting their time. Stay home. So what are they going to do? They're going to go to the street and ask for something that ain't going to do a damn bit of good. And they might get it. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't the government? That'll hold the poor bastards off for a while. Hey, government, can we have something that ain't going to help? Sure, here you go. But you still get no independence and sovereignty. You got a king. You got a monarch. And you think you got a democracy. Best of luck with that. So at any rate, so what happens now? I've been talking a while. What happens now? What happens now? Number one, things start closing. You're going to look around, and businesses and pubs and things of that nature are not going to be able to stay open because the energy cost is too high. So you're going to see a business shutdown. You think the COVID lockdowns and all of that shut down business, that ain't nothing. Wiping out everything. The corner store closed. Store after store, everything closed. Right. So now you're going to have a society where you kind of got to buy stuff off the black market or the gray market, because the normal above board market cannot survive. Just can't do it. Now, what else happens? Massive homelessness. Their resolution, the way they're going to fix the problem, is not going to be to give you sovereignty and independence. It's not going to be to restore the model of getting a low cost energy from Russia. It's going to be to tax your ass more and say, you know what little you got? Yeah. Now you think that your job you're losing your job, and that's going to hurt you. You think that the rising cost of inflation and energy and everything is going to hurt you. We ain't done with you yet. Yeah, we're going to tax you more. They're going to tax businesses as if they're not bad. So they're going to do everything. Why are they doing all of this stuff? Because they can't tell you the truth. They can't do what needs to be done. They can't say, we have to address the foundation of our economic model, because the U.S. government wouldn't be able to take your industry and bring it here. And that's the ultimate goal. So what happens then? First, let's face it. What are you going to do in Europe if you're rich and everything's collapsing around you? You're a rich person, you're in Europe, things are collapsing around you. You can't go to the bars, you can't buy the stuff you need, you can't enjoy the finer life. You're getting the hell out. So the Europeans, I bet you a lot of them go to Turkey. Turkey's still going to be warm. They're going to have heat. They're not idiots. You're off, you go to Turkey, or wherever the hell it's cheap to live. So one of the things going to happen is you're going to have a drain of the wealthy. They're getting the bloody hell out of Europe. Europe is going to be drained of very, very wealthy people. They're going to go where they can survive. That's number one. Number two, brain drain. And if you've ever seen what happens when the U.S. overthrows the government, they overthrow the Iraqis, they overthrow Libyans, etc. What happens if you're a doctor? What happens if you're a physicist? What happens if you're a person with tremendous skills that are needed? You go to the US, you go to China. You're right now, you're an electronic engineer, you're a physician, you're a doctor. You can go to China and get paid well. You can go to Russia and get paid well. You can go to the US and get paid well. You can leave Europe and you can go somewhere where you can get paid because you have a marketable skill. So the rich people are out of there first. Next, you have the people who are doctors and engineers, physicists, and let's be honest, ain't nobody to pay them anyway. The companies are gone. You're an engineer. Where are you going to work? All the companies are gone. There's nothing to engineer. Boom. The industry comes to the US. The capital, the wealth people, goes to the US or wherever the hell, China, right? The people with marketable skills, they're out of there. You get to the point where you ain't going to have nothing left but the poor and the working class. That's all going to be left. The working class with no work. A working class with no work. Homelessness, let's face it, will spiral out of control. If you want to know what it's going to look like, look at California, look at San Francisco, and turn the volume up on that to maximum. That's what it's going to look like. You're not going to have, you can't build a society when you don't have people with marketable skills because they all migrated elsewhere. I would say this, some of the migrants, some of the Middle Eastern migrants, Saudi Arabia, some of these other countries are trying to join BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're going to be building. These people are going to hell home. There'll be jobs there. They're at home. What are you kidding me? I'm going back to my country. There's some things going on there. I might be able to get a job. South America, what do you know? They're building a new canal in Nicaragua. I'm going to get a shovel-ready job. They're getting the hell out. Anybody who can is gone. The migrants, toast, done. They're going to be like, hey, guys, and perhaps in hindsight, when you all got mad because we came, I think you had a little something going on here. So we're out. Adios. They will be on those same damn boats. Oh, they have a few more dollars, so they'll buy an airline ticket and go the hell back where they came from because at least it's warm. You look at that. And who's going to be left? The working class, the working poor, and the poor. But you'll have a working class with no work. What happens? Now, let me ask you this. What happens in a neighborhood where there's a tremendous amount of poverty and desperation? Two things. And I'm a guy who spent many years in law enforcement, as opposed to, I only say that it's not like I'm bragging. It is what it is, right? I spent a lot of years in law enforcement, studying criminal justice, taught criminal justice on a college level. I understand these things, right? One of the things that, people want to pretend that don't understand social dynamics, that poverty is about bad people versus good people. In the same way that the world is about bad countries versus good countries, this oversimplification of reality that allows you to be manipulated by the oligarchs. So there's crime because there's bad people versus good people. Crime. Look, man, when I was at a low level in a cop, before I moved up the ladder, I always said I didn't arrest a whole lot of people with college degrees. I didn't arrest a whole lot of rich or wealthy or working class people. Very, very rare. Most of the people you arrest are poor. They're in desperation, right? So what are you going to get? You're going to get crime. Now, let me add this. They brought a bunch of people from with a questionable ideology from Ukraine to spread about. You're going to have desperate people. You're going to have people with a questionable ideology saying, you need to get one of these swastika tattoos and join me to push back against whatever group that, the Jews, the Muslims, whatever group they can identify that's their fault. They'll be there to say we must stand with the Azov battalion. So they'll be there to spread dissent and hatred throughout an impoverished, miserable hellhole of a continent. That the rich people are gone, the educated people that can get the hell out are gone, the jobs and industries gone, but the Nazis ain't gone. They ain't gone. They're here to stay. They love that kind of stuff, right? ISIS will come in because there's a lot of migrants and Muslims, the ones that don't leave, will be there, and they'll be angry and in desperation. And you know what angry and desperation, the anger and desperation breeds. So then you're going to have ISIS coming in saying, hey, guy, it's these infidels. They're the ones that are screwing us over. You got Nazis there and well armed with shit that they've been of trafficking out of Ukraine, going around blowing the bloody crap out of everything. ISIS, they're running around knifing people like they're poking you like you're a sponge, filling you full of holes. It ain't going to be a pleasant time. If you understand what I'm getting at, I'm just trying to say it ain't going to be a pleasant time, and it's obvious what's coming, right? So you now have a continent that has been deindustrialized, that's facing economic flight, capital flight. Let me add this. Even the financialized part of it, what's going to happen right now? Are you going to invest in anything in Europe? You're getting your money out of there. And furthermore, they've done something even worse, if it's possible. They've set it up so they seized the Venezuela. They had $1.5 billion in gold in London, and they said we want our money back, and London said, nah, we stole it, we're keeping it. Right? The Russians, hundreds of billions of dollars in investments in Europe, right? And hey, can we have our money back? No, we stole it. Capital flight, major capital flight. No banks, no international corporations. None of them are going to invest in Europe. They're not even going to save their money in the European banks because they know that there is an ideology there that says we can take anything you want. Capital is out of there in every way, shape, or form. The rich people are going to say, get my money out of here, man. These crazy people will take it. Don't want to do it. Right? So capital flight, investment flight, brain drain, you name it. And what is going to be left? You know what's going to be left? Remember that little story I told you about Haiti? A few oligarchs at the top of the hill. And as you come down the hill, there's a tiny little group of people, a little teeny sliver of some semblance of a middle class, just about gone. And you get further and further down the hill, you run into poverty, crime, gangs. And a lot of the gangs are there. They're like, oh, the gangs in Haiti are evil. They're actually gangs that are starting to come together saying, man, we're getting screwed. We got to protect ourselves from the US. The Haitians have enough sense. I'll put it like this. They got enough sense to know they're getting screwed by the US. The Europeans don't even have enough sense to know they're getting screwed by the US, but it ain't their fault because they're massive victims of massive propaganda. But the only reason the propaganda works is because they think the US is on their side. They think, hey, we're the Europeans in the US. We're all one group. We're all one culture. We're all sticking together. They believe that. That makes them vulnerable to that propaganda. That means by the time they realize it, they're going to be in the truck to the slaughterhouse. Well, excuse me, they're already in the truck to the slaughterhouse. They'll be hanging upside down by their feet, waiting to get their throat sliced at the slaughterhouse, gone along the assembly line. And somebody's going to then say, hey, remember a while back when Garland said to us, perhaps we should consider a plan to run away because the farmer and the shepherd are going to eat us? Yeah, I think he had something there. And then your throat gets sliced and into the machine you go. And next thing you know, some guy's shopping in the US because nobody's going to be able to afford meat in the EU. And there's a nice little thing. Look at that lamb chops. $4.99 a pound. I think we'll have them for dinner tonight. That's where you end up. All of that could have been avoided. At least you could have gave it a shot. I put it like this. If it's me, I've always said this, I've thought about self-defense. Man, if you're going to go down trying. If you're going to go out like a soldier, go out fighting, go out protesting, go down. If you're going to go, what was it? Malcolm X said, I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. That's the way I believe it. And sadly for Europe, they ain't even going to be on their knees. They're going out hung upside down voluntarily by their feet. It's a sad state of affairs for the Europeans, but the dynamics are clear. I see. Bottom line is this. They jumped, they got marched to a cliff. Their leaders marched them right to the cliff and said, jump. And the Europeans said, can I have a blue and yellow flag first? Sure. And we'll give you a blue and yellow pin. And here's what I want you to do at the edge of the cliff. I want you to yell, Slava Ukraine. And one by one, they watched each other. Slava Ukraine. Plop. Next. Slava Ukraine. Plop. One by one off the cliff. with their little blue and yellow flag, wave it in the wind until a red bloody splat hits at the bottom. And some of them in the air actually said, they looked up, perhaps I've been made a mistake. I've made a, nah, never mind. Slava, Ukraine, splat. That's Europe. There ain't, that's it. I see no way around that. I see no way to fix that. I see once you're in the air, they're in the air. They're in the air. They're not in the air because it couldn't be stopped. It could be stopped if Europeans understood the dynamics that I just put forward. They could stop it. They could stop it. If they understood those dynamics, yeah, they could stop it, because they'd look at it and they'd say to their leaders, oh, this is some bullshit here, man. This is not happening. Either, one of two things are going to happen. If we go off a cliff, it ain't going to be by ourselves. So either you can say to the U.S., look, we're getting some energy back. We're in this Ukraine thing, and we're going to get some level of independence. We'll see, because think about this. Just the fact that you say to the U.S., I ain't doing this, and in fact is claiming independence. Just the fact that you say to the U.S. empire, I'm not going to do what you want me to do, is an exclamation point behind that word independence. It's saying, you want me to destroy myself. I'm too independent to do that. So they got to look at it, but the people of Europe got to say to their leaders, we ain't putting up with this. This ain't going to work. You remember the French Revolution? Yeah, and they don't have to do that. They don't have to go chop their heads off. They just got to make it clear that they're willing to act in some kind of a way, that the whole continent is willing to say, we ain't going to work. Well, it's possible, if you look at all the blue and yellow flags, that they have been so brainwashed that now they're on the cliff, and Olaf Scholz is on one side. There's a nice orderly line to the edge of the cliff. And on one side is Liz Truss and Ursula von der Leyen and Olaf Scholz. On the other side, there's, the leaders of this country and that country. And one by one, they're handing them a yellow flag. They're taking a yellow flag, and they're yelling Slava Ukraine, jumping off a cliff. That's where they are right now. I don't know if there's a way back for Europe, but it is what it is. This is the natural direction that things are going, and I don't like it. I'm not happy with it. I love my European friends, but it is what it is. But because here's the thing about it. Because after that happens to Europe, what are those industries? The industries that they have stolen from Europe and brought to the US because Europe can't compete. Still, the labor is too high. The stuff is too high to compete with China and Russia and India. So the US will have labor, but who the hell are they going to, they'll have industry, but who the hell are they going to sell that stuff to? Because it'll be too expensive to compete with China in other markets. And they will have killed their major market, which is Europe. What's left? The same thing's coming for the US, the exact same thing. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Certainly appreciate you taking a few minutes. And I will, you see everything scrolling across the bottom there, patreon.com, if you can afford that. I got to run PayPal, $1, $3, $5, $100 million a month, whatever you can afford on Patreon. We certainly got Buy Me a Coffee. You can do that to help keep the channel going. Cash App, if you can slip a few beans, whatever you can do. Don't forget, I am on rockfin.com, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. It's a free speech platform. You can go to Rockfin. You can either simply become a free member and see everything I got, with the exception of one show, which is my Wednesday morning show with Scott Ritter, or I would really appreciate it if you could become a member, $9.99 per month, to become a subscriber. You don't have to do that, but if you do that, I appreciate it. That's what helps keep Rockfin going. It is a subscriber network. You can see everything for free, but the subscribers are what helps to keep it going, and it means that we don't have any advertisements. So become a Rockfin member anyway. But if you can be a subscriber and pay, that helps keep the channel going, and that's great appreciation for that. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Peace. A beautiful Thursday morning. Enjoy it. Hey, after saying that, I'm like, yeah, the world's going to shit. Everything's going to hell. Your life is done. Have a nice day. Yeah, maybe that isn't so appropriate. Peace. I'm out.